Emma sat in the passenger seat of Jack's car, her hands tightly clutching her purse, her heart racing in her chest. The road stretched before them, unfamiliar and quiet. The faint hum of the engine was the only sound, punctuated by the soft click of the turn signal as Jack made a left turn. She glanced at him, her adopted son, who had been the light of her life since the day she brought him home. His face was unreadable, eyes focused on the road ahead. She could tell something was off. He had been distant the past few days, avoiding her gaze, speaking in clipped sentences. "Where are we going, Jack?" she asked, her voice wavering. Jack didn't answer immediately. He cleared his throat and tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Emma's heart sank, and a familiar chill of dread settled in her stomach. She had been down this road before, not literally, of course, but emotionally. The fear of abandonment, the crushing anxiety that she might be left behind, forgotten like so many others in her past. She had lost family, friends, and her sense of belonging. And now, sitting beside her only son, the one person who had ever truly mattered, that fear was creeping back in. I just thought we could get away for a little while, you know?" Jack said finally, his voice soft but not reassuring. Emma frowned, her brow furrowing. They had never gone anywhere like this before. Jack had always been the steady one, the one who made sure she was comfortable, safe. She had adopted him when he was just a boy, and from the moment she first held him in her arms, she vowed to give him everything she had. She raised him as her own, and over the years, he became her best friend, her confidant, and the center of her world. But today felt different. The quiet between them was thick with unspoken words, with secrets that Jack had been hiding from her. Emma felt the knot in her stomach tighten as they drove further from the familiar streets of their neighborhood, past the park where they had spent many warm afternoons together, past the grocery store where she knew the cashier by name, past the places that made her feel like she was part of something. She turned to Jack, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jack, are we going to a nursing home?" The words hung in the air, sharp and accusing, and Emma immediately regretted saying them. But it was too late. The question was out there, and she couldn't take it back. Jack's grip on the steering wheel tightened further, and for a moment, Emma thought he might steer the car off the road. But he didn't. Instead, he swallowed hard. His jaw clenched as though he were struggling with something. His eyes flicked to her, and then away. "No, Mom," he said finally, his voice laced with something Emma couldn't quite place. Guilt, perhaps, or maybe frustration. "I'm not taking you anywhere like that." Emma's chest tightened with a mix of relief and confusion. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that he had her best interests at heart, but the nagging doubts refused to leave her mind. They passed a large, sterile-looking building, and for a moment, Emma thought she saw the faint outline of a sign in the distance, something that looked like it could be a nursing home. Her heart skipped a beat. "Jack," she began, but her voice faltered. "Where are we really going?" Jack didn't respond. The car continued its steady journey down the winding road, and Emma's mind raced. What was he hiding from her? Why wouldn't he just tell her the truth? She had spent years raising him, loving him, guiding him. She had been his mother, and now, in this moment, she felt like a stranger sitting beside him. Her eyes scanned the passing scenery, her mind wandering to all the times she had sacrificed for him, for their family. She had given him everything, her time, her love, her support, and now it seemed as though she was being left behind, cast aside like so many others who had once been a part of her life. She glanced at Jack again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jack, if you're taking me somewhere I don't want to go, just tell me." He didn't look at her. His eyes remained locked on the road ahead, his face a mask of determination. But Emma could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand trembled ever so slightly on the wheel. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Emma's thoughts were a jumble of fear and confusion, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Why was Jack acting this way? Why was he taking her somewhere she didn't want to go? Her breath caught in her throat as the car turned down another street. This one was even quieter than the others, lined with trees that seemed to stretch on forever. The anxiety in Emma's chest grew stronger, more suffocating with each passing second. She was about to lose her composure when Jack's voice broke through the silence. "Mom," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper, "we're not going to a nursing home." But the way he said it, hesitant, uncertain, made Emma feel as though something else was at play. She wanted to trust him. She wanted to believe in him. But the road ahead felt like a path into the unknown. And Emma wasn't sure if she was ready to face what lay at the end of it. Have you ever faced a moment where you were sure something terrible was about to happen? What would you do? Leave your opinion in the comments below. The car glided along the narrow road, and Emma's mind drifted back to a time long before she had ever met Jack. Before the joy of motherhood had filled her heart, there was a loneliness that defined her life. She had once been a young woman full of dreams and ambition, but life had not been kind to her. Family had always been a distant concept, something she saw in the lives of others, but never quite within her grasp. Emma had grown up in a small town, surrounded by neighbors who knew everyone's business. Her parents, both hardworking but emotionally distant, never provided the warmth she longed for. The house she grew up in was filled with the constant hum of responsibilities, but lacking in love. Her mother had been strict, her father silent and uninvolved. The idea of family had always been something of a mystery to Emma. She had watched the other children play, their homes filled with laughter, and wondered what it would be like to feel truly loved. When Emma was 12, her life changed forever. Her parents, both in their 40s, had died in a car accident, leaving her orphaned at a young age. The world she had known crumbled around her, and she was sent to live with distant relatives who were kind but distant, never truly connecting with her in a way she needed. They provided her with shelter, food, and an education, but the void left by her parents' passing was never filled. By the time Emma turned 18, she was ready to leave. She had been raised in a household full of rules and expectations, and when she finally had the freedom to choose her path, she left the small town behind. She moved to the city, determined to build a life for herself. But despite her independence, she could never shake the loneliness that had been with her since childhood. She found herself yearning for something more, someone to share her life with, someone to love. It was during this time of yearning that Emma met a kind man named Robert. He was older than she was, with a steady job and a warm heart. Robert was everything she had ever wanted in a partner. They married within a year of meeting, and for a time, Emma believed that the life she had always dreamed of was finally within her reach. But life, it seemed, had other plans. Emma and Robert tried for years to have children, but it never happened. Emma's heart ached as she watched other women around her give birth, their families growing while her own remained empty. She blamed herself, her body, her luck. Robert was understanding, but Emma could see the sadness in his eyes as well. The void in their lives was palpable. It was then that Emma heard about a local adoption agency. The idea of adopting a child, of giving a home to a child who needed one, resonated deeply with her. She knew she had the love to give, and she longed to have a child of her own. Robert was hesitant at first, worried about the challenges, but Emma's determination won him over. At 35, Emma and Robert adopted a 5-year-old boy named Jack. He had been in and out of foster homes, never knowing the stability of a permanent family. When Emma first saw him, with his large brown eyes and shy smile, she knew instantly that he was the child meant for her. She vowed to give him everything she never had, the love, the support, the family. And she did. The years passed, and Emma poured all of her energy into raising Jack. He thrived in their home, excelling in school, making friends, and growing into a kind and caring young man. Emma and Robert had finally become the family they had always dreamed of, their home filled with laughter and love. She had spent so many years feeling incomplete, but now, with Jack in her life, she felt whole. Filled with the sound of his laughter grew quiet, and Emma felt the ache of emptiness creeping back into her life. That's when the fear started to take hold. Fear of losing Jack, fear of being left behind. She had fought so hard for her family, for her place in the world, and now she feared it would all slip away. When Jack moved back home after college, she had hoped things would return to the way they were. But something was different. Jack had changed. He was no longer the little boy who had needed her, and Emma struggled to find her place in his life. And now, Sitting in the car beside him, she felt the weight of her fears more than ever. Was this it? Was Jack finally pushing her away, taking her to a place she didn't want to be? She couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, something that would change everything. Her heart clenched as she looked at Jack, the boy she had raised, the one she had loved unconditionally. She wondered if he even realized how much she needed him now. She had given so much of herself to him, and now she was terrified of what he might be planning. The car continued its quiet journey down the road, and Emma's mind, like a whirlwind, kept returning to the changes she had noticed in Jack over the past few months. Ever since he graduated college and moved back in, something had shifted between them. It was subtle at first, slight changes in tone, moments where Jack would seem distracted, as though his mind were miles away. Emma tried to brush it off as the usual growing pains of a young man trying to figure out his place in the world. But with every passing day, it seemed like the distance between them was growing. At dinner, they no longer laughed like they used to. The conversations were often one-sided, with Jack offering only short answers, barely looking up from his phone or laptop. Emma couldn't help but feel the quiet rejection that hung in the air whenever she tried to make conversation. She had tried to talk to him about it, tried to understand what was going on in his life. But Jack had always deflected with a quick excuse or a change of subject. It was as though he didn't want to share anything with her anymore. Emma's heart ached with every attempt to reach him. She had raised him, loved him with all her heart, and now she felt like an outsider in her own home. She didn't want to blame Jack. She knew it wasn't his fault. He was an adult now, forging his own path. But that didn't mean the pain of feeling left behind didn't sting. The silence between them grew heavier, and Emma found herself retreating to her favorite chair by the window, watching the world outside. It was her way of coping with the emptiness she felt inside. She used to find comfort in the rhythm of their household, the sound of Jack's footsteps down the hallway, the laughter that filled the kitchen. But now, the house felt colder, more isolated. Even Robert, who had once been her rock, seemed to retreat into his own world, too consumed with his work to notice the growing distance between them. That's when the idea of a nursing home started to creep into Emma's thoughts. She tried not to let it take hold, but the more she thought about it, the more it seemed like a real possibility. As she sat there, staring out at the quiet street, she wondered if Jack had been making plans for her future without her. Maybe he had decided it was time for her to go somewhere else, to leave him to live his life without the burden of her presence. The thought was a sharp knife to her heart. The mere idea of Jack wanting to put her in a nursing home was too much for her to bear. She couldn't imagine living in a place where she was just another face in the crowd, surrounded by strangers, without the comfort of her own home. But at the same time, she couldn't shake the feeling that Jack was trying to push her away, to distance himself from her, and she didn't know how to stop it. Suddenly, the car turned a sharp corner, and Emma was snapped back to the present moment. She looked at Jack again, his face still focused on the road, but there was a tension in his posture that Emma couldn't ignore. She needed to know the truth, needed to understand what was really going on. She had been patient, she had tried to give him space, but she couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when it felt like the walls between them were closing in. "Jack," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly, "I need to know what's going on. You've been distant for weeks now, and I don't understand why. If this is about something else, about putting me somewhere, I need to know. Please." Jack's grip tightened on the wheel, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he turned to look at her. His eyes were filled with a mix of frustration and something else Emma couldn't quite place. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, as though unsure of how to proceed. "I'm not putting you anywhere, Mom," Jack finally said, his voice strained. "It's not like that." Emma's heart skipped a beat. She wanted to believe him, wanted to hold on to that thread of hope that everything would be okay, but something in Jack's demeanor, something in his eyes, told her that the truth wasn't so simple. "Then what is it, Jack? Why are you taking me out here? Why have you been avoiding me?" Emma's voice broke, the years of emotional turmoil spilling out in a moment of raw honesty. "What did I do wrong? I've always been here for you, Jack. Always. I just need to understand." Jack didn't answer right away. The car hummed along the empty road, the only sound between them the beating of Emma's heart, the weight of her unspoken fears settling in. She could feel the air between them thick with the things left unsaid, the emotions that neither of them seemed ready to confront. "I'm not trying to hurt you, Mom," Jack said, his voice softening as he turned to face her, though his eyes were still clouded with something difficult to read. "It's just, I don't know how to handle everything. I don't know how to fix this." Emma's confusion deepened. "Fix what? What's broken, Jack?" Jack exhaled sharply, his hands loosening their grip on the wheel. He took a deep breath, his eyes glancing briefly at her before returning to the road ahead. "I've been trying to find a way to make things better, but the truth is, I don't know what you need from me anymore, Mom." Emma's stomach dropped at his words. She had spent so many years believing that love and support were enough, that they were the glue that held everything together. But now, hearing Jack speak those words, a painful truth began to dawn on her. She wasn't sure if she was ready for the answer, but she knew she needed to hear it. The car rolled to a stop in front of an unfamiliar building, a sprawling structure with large windows and neatly manicured grounds. Emma blinked, trying to make sense of the surroundings, her mind still tangled with the conversation she just had with Jack. The tension in the air between them felt thick enough to suffocate, but she didn't know how to address it. Her mind was still reeling from his words. "I don't know what you need from me anymore, Mom." Jack shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting nervously between the road and the building in front of them. Emma's heart was racing. The place they had arrived at looked like a modern, well-kept facility, almost too perfect, too pristine. She noticed the sign by the entrance, the words "Silver Pines Assisted Living" etched in elegant letters. Her breath caught in her throat. "No, it can't be." "Jack," Emma's voice was barely above a whisper, her hand trembling as she placed it on the door handle. What is this place?" Jack sighed, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of the moment was finally catching up to him. He ran a hand through his hair, his face a mixture of frustration and sadness. "Mom, I didn't know how to bring this up. I didn't want to hurt you, but I think it's time. I think this is what's best for you." Emma's mind spun. She had feared this moment for weeks, had sensed the growing distance between them, and now it was happening. Her stomach churned as her emotions spiraled out of control. She stared at the building, at the well-manicured lawn, at the carefully placed flowers, all of it feeling so cold, so foreign. "Jack, no," she said, shaking her head. "I don't want to be here. I don't need to be in a place like this. I'm fine at home. I can take care of myself." I thought we were okay." "I know, Mom," Jack said, his voice tight, "but you're not fine. I've been seeing it for a while now. You're slowing down. You can't keep doing everything you used to do. I just want you to be happy, to be safe, and I think this is the best option for you. I've looked into it. They have great care here. You'll be surrounded by people who will help you." Tears stung Emma's eyes as she fought to hold them back. This wasn't the way it was supposed to go. She had spent so many years raising Jack, loving him, providing for him, and now he was telling her that she wasn't enough anymore, that she wasn't capable, that she needed to be taken care of. The truth hit her like a punch to the gut. Was this how it was going to end? In a sterile facility, surrounded by strangers? Was this what Jack thought of her now? "Jack, I've always been there for you. I've always done everything I could. You're my son. You're all I've ever had. And now you're taking me away from everything I know." Emma's voice trembled as the weight of the situation finally sank in. "How could you do this?" Jack's face twisted with guilt. He reached out, his hand hovering over hers, but he didn't touch her. "I'm not trying to hurt you, Mom. I swear I'm not. I just want you to have the care you deserve. You're getting older. I can't take care of you the way you need me to, and I don't want you to be alone when I'm not around. This is the right thing." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't comprehend what was happening. She felt like the ground beneath her was slipping away. The tears she had been holding back spilled over, and she wiped them away with a shaky hand. "Jack, I don't need a nursing home," she said, her voice filled with desperation. "I need you. I need you to understand that I can still be independent. I'm still your mother. I'm not ready to be put away. I don't want to put you away, Mom." I just want what's best for you, Jack repeated, his voice breaking now. You've done so much for me. I don't want to see you struggle. Emma shook her head, feeling a mix of anger, confusion, and sadness. I'm not struggling, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I'm just getting older, but that doesn't mean I don't deserve to live my life. I don't want to be forgotten. I don't want to be put in a place where no one will visit me. Jack closed his eyes, his hand resting on the steering wheel. The weight of the decision was clearly weighing heavily on him. I don't want to forget you, Mom. I could never forget you. But I can't be there all the time. I have my own life now. I just want to make sure you're okay. The silence between them was suffocating. Emma stared out the window, trying to gather her thoughts, trying to make sense of the confusion that was overwhelming her. The person she had devoted her life to, her son, the one she had raised from a young age, was now making decisions for her, as though he didn't think she was capable of making her own. Her heart ached, and a part of her was furious. But at the same time, there was a flicker of understanding, a small piece of her that realized Jack was just trying to do what he thought was best for her. He loved her. She knew that. But did he really know her? Finally, Emma turned to Jack, her voice steady but filled with emotion. I don't want to go in there, Jack. I don't want this life. Please, just give me some time to figure things out. I'll find a way to make it work. But don't shut me out. Jack looked at her with tears in his eyes. He wanted to say more, but the words got stuck in his throat. The reality of the situation was too complicated for both of them, and neither one of them knew how to move forward. For a long moment, they sat in the car, the world outside feeling distant and cold, just like the building before them. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision for a loved one? How do you balance doing what's best for them while respecting their independence and wishes? The silence in the car was heavy, almost unbearable. Emma stared out the window, watching the soft sway of the trees in the breeze, her mind trying to make sense of the chaotic swirl of emotions inside her. Jack's hand rested on the steering wheel, his fingers tapping nervously, but neither of them spoke. Emma knew he was torn, but so was she. Every part of her screamed to fight this, to refuse to go into that building, to remind Jack of all the years they had spent together, of the bond they shared. But at the same time, there was a part of her that understood. Jack had a life now. He was busy. He had his own responsibilities. And though it broke her heart to admit it, maybe he was right. Maybe she couldn't do everything she used to. But that didn't mean she was ready to give up the life she had built, the life that had kept her going for all these years. Emma looked over at Jack, his face shadowed with uncertainty. He wasn't the same carefree young man she had raised. He had grown up, but so had she. And the truth was, neither of them knew how to navigate this new phase of their relationship. They were both standing on the edge of something neither was ready for. Jack, Emma's voice was soft, but steady. Can we talk about this? Really talk about it? Jack didn't respond immediately. He let out a slow breath, his shoulders sagging as if he were carrying the weight of the world. Finally, he turned to face her, his eyes filled with a mix of guilt and frustration. I don't want to hurt you, Mom, he said quietly. I don't know what else to do. I've been thinking about this for so long, and I keep going back and forth, but I don't want you to end up alone. I just want you to be happy. Emma's heart clenched. She could see the anguish in Jack's eyes, the love he had for her still there, buried under layers of fear and doubt. He was trying so hard, but the road he was taking her down felt wrong. She wasn't ready for this. She didn't want to give up yet. Jack, I'm not asking you to be my caretaker, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I just need you to be here. I need you to understand that I can still be independent, even if it's in a different way. I don't want to lose you, and I don't want to lose myself. Jack's eyes flickered with something. Was it guilt? Before he looked away, staring at the building again. It was as if the finality of the decision was right in front of him, and he wasn't ready to face it. I don't want to lose you either, Mom, but I can't be everything to you. I can't be there all the time. I can't be the one who makes sure you're okay every day. I'm not prepared for that. Emma's heart broke for him. She could see the internal struggle he was facing, and part of her wanted to protect him from the burden of it all. She had always been the strong one, the one who had made sacrifices for him. But now, in this moment, she realized that Jack was carrying the weight of his own life. and it was heavy. "I know you're not," Emma said, her voice thick with emotion. "But you don't have to be. You just have to be my son. That's all I need." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, neither of them knew how to respond. They were at a crossroads, with no clear way forward. Jack's eyes softened, and he finally reached over, placing his hand on hers. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. He didn't know what the future held, and neither did Emma. But at that moment, they both knew they needed to be honest with each other, to truly understand what they wanted from their relationship. "Okay, Mom," Jack said quietly. "We'll figure this out together. But I need you to promise me something." Emma looked up at him, her heart filled with both fear and hope. "What?" "Promise me that you'll talk to me when you need help. Don't try to do everything on your own," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Promise me that you won't shut me out." Emma nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I promise, Jack. I promise." They sat there for a long moment, the air between them feeling a little less suffocating. The tension hadn't entirely dissolved, but it had shifted. They were both still unsure of what was best, but there was a glimmer of understanding, a shared sense of vulnerability. Neither of them had the answers, but for the first time in a long time, they both felt like they were facing the future together. After a few moments, Jack slowly put the car in reverse, pulling away from the entrance of the assisted living facility. Emma didn't know what the next chapter would look like for her or for Jack, but for now, they were taking the first step towards something new. And that was enough. The drive back to Emma's house felt different. The tension had eased, but it hadn't disappeared entirely. Emma stared out the window as the familiar sights of their neighborhood passed by. The streetlights flickered on, casting a warm, orange glow over the quiet homes. She recognized the small details, the old oak tree at the corner, the flower shop that had been there since she moved in. But today, everything felt a little distant. She had lived in this house for so long, and yet, for the first time in years, it no longer felt like home. "Mom!" Jack's voice broke through her thoughts, pulling her back to the present. "Are you okay?" Emma turned to look at him, seeing the concern in his eyes. She didn't want to worry him, didn't want to seem weak, but the truth was, she wasn't okay. She wasn't sure how she felt. She wasn't sure about anything anymore. "I'm fine," she lied, offering him a weak smile. "Just tired, I guess." Jack nodded, though he didn't look convinced. "I know this is hard. I never wanted it to be like this, but I think we can find a way to make things work. Maybe we can talk to a professional, someone who can help us figure out the best way forward." Emma didn't respond immediately. The idea of talking to someone about all of this felt like admitting defeat. It felt like giving up control of her own life, and she wasn't ready to do that. But then she remembered the conversation they had just had. How Jack had seemed so lost, how he had admitted he didn't know what to do. Maybe a little help wouldn't be so bad. Maybe, just maybe, it could help them both navigate the changes without losing each other in the process. "I don't know," she said, her voice soft. "I don't know if I'm ready for that." Jack reached over, placing his hand on hers. "It's okay, Mom. I'll be with you every step of the way. We'll figure this out together." Emma squeezed his hand, her heart swelling with both gratitude and sorrow. She knew he was trying. He had always tried. But something was changing, and she didn't know how to stop it. Her own independence, her sense of self, was slipping away, and she wasn't sure if she could find it again. As they pulled into the driveway, Emma couldn't help but feel a wave of emotions crash over her. The house she had spent so many years making her own, the home she had filled with memories of raising Jack, now seemed almost alien. She had given everything to her family, to Jack, but now, as she stood at the crossroads of her life, she wondered if any of it had been enough. Jack turned off the engine and looked at her. "I'm here, Mom. You're not alone. No matter what happens, you're not alone." Emma nodded, though a part of her wasn't sure if she believed him. She had spent so many years taking care of herself, of making sure everything was in order. But now, in the quiet of her own home, she felt more alone than ever before. The two of them sat in silence for a long moment. Jack looked like he wanted to say something more, but the words didn't come. Emma felt the weight of the years between them, the distance that had grown despite their best efforts. but she wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Finally, Emma opened the door and stepped out of the car. Jack followed her, his presence a steady comfort beside her as they walked toward the front door. She fumbled for her keys, her hands shaking slightly, and for a moment, she thought about what might happen if she just opened the door and walked away from everything she knew. If she could just leave, take control of her life once again, find the courage to start over. But then Jack's voice cut through her thoughts. Mom, we don't have to figure this all out right now. It's okay to take things one step at a time. Emma turned to look at him, seeing the genuine concern on his face. Maybe he wasn't ready to let go of their old life either. Maybe they could figure this out together, step by step, without losing everything they had built. She took a deep breath and nodded. You're right. One step at a time. As they walked inside, Emma knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But she also knew she wasn't walking it alone. And for now, that was enough. The days after their conversation felt surreal. Jack's words echoed in Emma's mind, one step at a time. But each step felt heavy, laden with the uncertainty of what lay ahead. The house, once a sanctuary filled with the sounds of life and laughter, now felt quieter, emptier. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that everything was slipping through her fingers. She spent most of her days in the kitchen, preparing meals like she always had, though it no longer felt comforting. The kitchen had been her domain for as long as she could remember. She had cooked family dinners, packed Jack's lunch when he was younger, and spent countless hours there, baking cookies or making their favorite meals. It had always been her way of nurturing, of showing love. But now, with Jack busy and the house still, the act of cooking felt more like a reminder of everything that had changed. Jack continued to be supportive, as much as he could. He made sure to call her every evening after work, and even stopped by a couple of times a week. They talked about small things, about the weather, about what Jack had for lunch. But there were no longer any long, heartfelt conversations, no deep discussions about their lives. The walls that had been built around Emma's heart were becoming harder to break down, even though Jack was trying. One evening, Jack sat at the kitchen table, staring at a stack of papers in front of him. He had brought over some paperwork about assisted living facilities, hoping to ease Emma's worries. He knew she hadn't been ready to consider it, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it was the only way forward. He watched Emma as she moved around the kitchen, her movements slow and deliberate, almost mechanical. Mom, Jack said, breaking the silence, I think we need to take a look at some of these places, just to see. Maybe it'll help you feel more comfortable with the idea. Emma froze for a moment, her back to him. She had been trying to ignore the stack of papers, pretending they didn't exist, but Jack's words made it impossible to continue hiding. She turned to face him, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. I don't want to leave this house, Jack, she said, her voice trembling. This is where I raised you. This is where we built our lives. How can I just walk away from it all? Jack sighed, his face softening. He didn't want to push her, but he knew they were running out of time. The strain was becoming too much for both of them. I understand, Mom, he said, his voice gentle. But maybe this isn't about leaving. Maybe it's about finding a new place that can give you the support you need, so you can keep living the way you want to. You don't have to give up everything. You can still make it your own. Emma wiped a tear from her cheek, looking at the papers in front of her. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like. She had always been so focused on what she might lose, but what if there was something to gain? What if this was an opportunity to create a new chapter in her life? One where she wasn't constantly struggling to do everything herself. But fear still clung to her heart. What if it wasn't enough? What if this new phase of life didn't live up to the memories she held so dearly? She couldn't ignore the overwhelming sense of loss, but there was also a small flicker of hope, a hope that, just maybe, this change wouldn't be the end of everything, but the beginning of something new. Jack watched her closely, sensing her hesitation. He didn't want to rush her, but he also didn't want to watch her continue to suffer in silence. Mom, you don't have to make a decision right now. Just think about it. Let's visit some places together. If nothing feels right, then we'll keep looking. But I think it might help to at least consider the options. Emma looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of comfort. Maybe Jack didn't have all the answers, but he was trying. He was trying to help her find a way forward. "Okay," Emma said softly. "I'll think about it." As Jack left that evening, Emma sat in the quiet of the kitchen, the papers still spread out before her. She hadn't made a decision yet, but she felt the first stirrings of something new. It wasn't an easy road ahead, but maybe, just maybe, it was a road worth taking. The following morning, Emma woke up early. The house was still, the way it had been for the past few weeks. The stillness wasn't comforting anymore. It felt suffocating. She walked slowly to the kitchen, her hands instinctively reaching for the coffee pot. The familiar routine of brewing her morning cup of coffee should have been soothing, but it wasn't. Everything felt out of place. The papers Jack had left on the kitchen table the night before were still there, staring back at her. They were a reminder of the decision she hadn't made. And yet, for the first time, Emma felt the faintest glimmer of resolve. She didn't know what the future held, but maybe it was time to take the first step, no matter how daunting it seemed. After a few moments of hesitation, Emma picked up the papers. She scanned the list of facilities, looking at names she didn't recognize and descriptions of places she couldn't imagine calling home. She had always prided herself on being independent, on managing everything on her own. But now, as she looked at the options before her, the realization struck her hard. She couldn't keep doing it alone. The weight of her health, the physical and emotional toll it was taking, was too much for one person to bear. Maybe Jack was right. Maybe this wasn't about giving up her life. It was about finding a new way to live it. Emma sighed, setting the papers down. She couldn't do this on her own. She needed Jack. She picked up her phone and dialed his number. It rang twice before he picked up. "Hey, Mom. You okay?" Jack's voice was warm, and she could hear the concern in it, even from the other end of the line. "I'm fine, Jack," Emma said, trying to sound casual, though her voice betrayed her. "I've been thinking, maybe we should take a look at those places you showed me." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Emma could practically hear Jack's relief. "You mean it? You're sure?" "Yeah," she said quietly, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. "I think it's time. I don't want to do this alone anymore." Jack's voice softened, filled with a tenderness that almost made Emma tear up. "Okay, Mom, we'll do this together. I'll pick you up this afternoon, and we'll visit a few places. No pressure. Just see how you feel." Emma hung up the phone and sat back in the chair, her heart racing. She had taken the first step, and it was terrifying. But there was a sense of relief that came with it as well. She didn't have to face this alone anymore. The day passed quickly. Emma spent the morning preparing herself, mentally bracing for what was to come. She couldn't help but feel a little lost. She had spent so many years raising Jack, making sure he had everything he needed, that she had never thought about what she might need. She had been so focused on being strong for him that she had forgotten how to be strong for herself. When Jack arrived later that afternoon, Emma was waiting for him by the door. She had dressed in her favorite sweater, the one that made her feel like herself, even if only for a little while. Jack smiled when he saw her, the warmth of his presence giving her a sense of peace. "You ready?" he asked, his eyes searching her face for any sign of doubt. Emma hesitated for just a moment before nodding. "Yeah, let's go." The drive was quiet. Jack seemed to sense Emma's need for space, so they didn't talk much. Instead, Emma looked out the window, watching the world pass by. It was strange, seeing everything as though for the first time. The trees, the houses, the sky. All of it seemed so familiar, yet so foreign. When they arrived at the first facility, Emma's heart began to race. The building was large, but the exterior was charming, with vines crawling up the walls and flowers lining the path to the entrance. She hesitated at the door, her hand hovering over the handle. Jack was right beside her, offering her the reassurance she needed. "We don't have to make any decisions today, Mom. We're just looking." Taking a deep breath, Emma pushed the door open, stepping into the lobby. The space was airy, with soft music playing in the background. It didn't feel as cold as she had imagined it would. There were people here. Some chatting with each other, some reading, others just sitting quietly. They all seemed at ease, and for a brief moment, Emma thought she saw a glimpse of what her future might look like. The tour guide led them through the facility, showing Emma the common areas, the dining room, and the activity rooms. It was beautiful in its own way, clean and peaceful. There was even a small garden in the back, where residents could sit and enjoy the sunshine. Emma felt a sense of calm wash over her as she walked through the space. It wasn't home, not yet, but it felt like a possibility. A place where she could be cared for, but still retain some independence. A place where Jack wouldn't have to worry about her every day. As the tour ended, the guide asked if Emma had any questions. Emma hesitated, but then she found herself asking the question that had been on her mind for weeks. "What happens if I decide to stay here?" she asked quietly. The guide smiled warmly. "You'll have your own space, your privacy, but you'll also have access to support whenever you need it. There are activities, meals, and people to talk to. It's about finding the right balance for you." Emma nodded, feeling a lump form in her throat. She wasn't sure what the right decision was yet, but for the first time, she could see the possibility of a new life. It wasn't the life she had imagined, but it could be a life that worked for her. The drive home was quieter than the trip there. Jack kept glancing at Emma, unsure of what she was thinking, but Emma said nothing. She was lost in thought, her mind swirling with emotions. The visit to the assisted living facility had been an overwhelming experience, but not in the way she had feared. It wasn't the cold, lifeless place she had imagined. Instead, it felt warm, comforting even. It felt like a possibility. Emma gazed out of the car window, watching the scenery blur by. It was hard to reconcile the idea of leaving her home, but something about that garden, the people in the common areas, even the soft music in the background, she could imagine herself there. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of everything she had known. Maybe it was the beginning of something new. When they arrived back at the house, Emma sat in the car for a moment before getting out. She needed time to process everything. It wasn't going to be an easy decision, but at least now, she could picture a life that didn't feel as lonely, as burdensome. "Thanks for today, Jack," she said softly, turning to face her son. "I think I needed to see it for myself." Jack nodded, his face showing relief, though he didn't push her for any more answers. "We'll take it slow, Mom. No rush." As Emma walked into the house, she felt the familiar weight of the silence settle over her. It wasn't the same as it used to be. The quiet had always been peaceful, but now it felt oppressive. She made her way into the kitchen, the place she'd spent so many years in, and put the kettle on. Maybe some tea would help clear her mind. While the kettle heated, Emma sat at the kitchen table, staring at the family photos on the walls. She hadn't really looked at them in a long time. There was one of her and Jack, taken when he was about 10 years old. He was standing next to her, both of them smiling, full of joy. Emma smiled at the memory. It felt like a lifetime ago. The sound of the kettle whistling snapped her out of her reverie. She poured the hot water into her favorite mug and took a sip, feeling the warmth spread through her. But it didn't settle her nerves, didn't calm the storm of thoughts swirling in her mind. Jack's words kept echoing in her head. Just think about it. Take it one step at a time. It was one step, wasn't it? Going to that facility had been a step. But what came next? Could she really leave this house? The house she had raised Jack in. The house that held so many memories? The thought made her heart ache. But there was also another part of her. One that was more practical, more realistic, that knew this might be the only way forward. She couldn't keep pretending she didn't need help. Jack had his own life now, his own family, his own responsibilities. She couldn't ask him to keep shouldering everything. The phone rang, cutting through the quiet. Emma picked it up without thinking. "Hi, Mom," Jack said. "I've been thinking about our visit today, and I just wanted to check in with you. How do you feel about it?" Emma hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She took a deep breath before answering. "I think it's a good place, Jack," she said softly. I felt something there. Like it could be a place where I could be myself, but still have support. I'm not sure if I'm ready, but I think it's worth considering." Jack's voice softened with relief. "I'm so glad to hear you say that, Mom. We'll figure this out together, okay? There's no rush." Emma nodded, even though he couldn't see her. She felt a small sense of peace wash over her. It wasn't a decision she had made lightly, but it felt like the right first step. It wasn't about giving up, It was about giving herself the chance to live in a way that wasn't constantly defined by struggle. Over the next few days, Emma continued to think about the decision. She visited a couple of other facilities, but none of them felt quite right. Some were too large, some too sterile, but the first place, the one she had visited with Jack, that was the one that stayed with her. There was something about the way it felt like a community, a place where people were cared for but still allowed to live with dignity. Finally, after days of reflection, Emma made her decision. She picked up the phone and called the facility. The conversation was short but important. She was ready to take the next step. "I'd like to move forward," she told the woman on the other end of the line. "I'd like to make this my new home." There was a long pause before the woman responded, her voice warm and reassuring. "We'll help you every step of the way, Emma. You're making the right choice." After she hung up, Emma sat for a moment, feeling a mixture of emotions. She was nervous, yes, but there was also a deep sense of relief. She had made a decision, and now she could look forward to what came next. She wasn't sure what it would be, but she was no longer alone in making it. Have you ever had to make a big decision that took a lot of courage? What was it like when you finally made your choice? The day had finally come. Emma sat in her living room, the room that had been her sanctuary for so many years, watching as the movers packed up the last of her belongings. It was surreal. Each box they loaded into the truck represented a part of her life, a chapter she was closing. The photo frames, the trinkets on the mantel, the books she had read over and over. All of it was being carefully wrapped and transported to a new place. She had never imagined that her life would lead her to this point, to a place where she was leaving the home she had built with Jack, the home that had witnessed so many milestones, birthdays, anniversaries, quiet mornings, and loud family gatherings. And yet, here she was, on the brink of a new adventure, a new chapter that was both terrifying and hopeful. Jack had been there all morning, helping with the final details. He had insisted on taking the day off work, not just to supervise the move, but to make sure Emma felt supported. She knew he was worried, though. She could see it in his eyes every time he looked at her, as if he were waiting for her to back out at the last minute. But Emma had made her decision. She wasn't going to back out. This wasn't a retreat. It was an opportunity. She didn't want to be a burden to Jack anymore. She didn't want to be a prisoner in her own home, constantly battling her limitations. The assisted living facility, the one she had visited with Jack, was a place that offered freedom, but also support. She could keep her independence, but with help when she needed it. It felt like the best option, and Emma was ready to embrace it. As the last box was loaded into the moving truck, Emma stood up and turned to Jack. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady, though a small tremor betrayed the emotions she was feeling inside. Jack smiled, though it was laced with concern. "Are you sure, Mom? This is a big step." "I'm sure," she replied softly, walking over to him and placing a hand on his arm. "You've done so much for me, Jack. Now it's time for me to do something for myself." Jack nodded, but Emma could see the hint of sadness in his eyes. She knew he was afraid of losing her, afraid that this would be the beginning of something he couldn't control. But Emma wasn't leaving him behind. She was just finding a way to live that was more manageable, more sustainable. The drive to the facility was quiet. Jack's car hummed along the road, and Emma sat in the passenger seat, her hands folded in her lap. She kept looking out the window, watching the world pass by. It wasn't her home anymore, but it was still the world she knew. It was comforting and unsettling at the same time. When they arrived at the facility, Emma felt a flutter of nerves in her chest. She had already seen the place, but now that she was actually going to live there, it felt different. Would she be able to make it feel like home? Would she fit in with the other residents? Would she be able to adjust to this new life? "Ready?" Jack asked gently, looking at her with a mixture of love and concern. Emma took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." They walked inside together, and the familiar warmth of the facility greeted them. The same music played softly in the background, and the same people were sitting in the common areas, chatting quietly or reading. The atmosphere felt welcoming, like a place where people could find peace and purpose. The staff greeted them, and Emma felt a sense of comfort as they led her to her new apartment. It wasn't large, but it was cozy, just enough space for her to feel comfortable without feeling overwhelmed. There was a small kitchenette, a sitting area with a comfortable chair, and a bedroom with a large window that let in plenty of natural light. As the staff left her to unpack, Emma stood in the middle of the room, taking it all in. It wasn't her old home, but it was a place she could make her own. She looked out the window, seeing the garden just beyond the building. It reminded her of the time she had spent tending to her own garden at home, the flowers she had planted with Jack when he was young. "This isn't so bad," she murmured to herself, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I think I could get used to this." Jack helped her unpack the essentials, clothes, toiletries, the things she needed to settle in. He made sure everything was in place before he reluctantly said goodbye. "I'll check in tomorrow, okay? We'll make sure you're all settled in." Emma nodded. "Thank you, Jack, for everything." As Jack left, Emma sat down on the couch, feeling both a sense of relief and loss. She was starting a new chapter, but it didn't come without its own challenges. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but she knew one thing for certain. She was ready to face it. The door to her apartment opened, and a friendly staff member came in with a tray of tea. "I thought you might like a cup," the woman said with a smile. Emma smiled back. "Thank you." As she took the cup of tea, Emma realized that for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. This was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, no doubt, but she was no longer alone. She had made the decision to take control of her life again, and that was the first step towards something new and hopeful. The first few days at the facility passed in a blur of new faces, unfamiliar routines, and quiet adjustments. Emma spent much of her time exploring the grounds and settling into her new apartment. There were moments when she felt a bit lost, but there were also moments of peace, small victories where she felt more at ease with the decision she had made. One of the first things Emma did was arrange her belongings, trying to make the space feel more like home. The small wooden table by the window became her favorite spot. She placed a few of her cherished books there, along with a vase of fresh flowers she had picked from the garden outside. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She couldn't deny that the silence in the apartment felt different now. It was a quieter kind of loneliness than she had experienced at home. In her old house, there had always been the noise of the outside world, the distant hum of traffic, the rustling of leaves in the wind. But now, it was just stillness. And though she knew she wasn't truly alone, she couldn't help but feel that way sometimes. On the second day, she was invited to join a group activity in the common room, a book club that met once a week. It was a simple invitation, but it stirred something inside of her. Reading had always been a passion of hers, something she had shared with Jack when he was younger. The idea of discussing a book with others felt like a way to connect again, to step out of her own thoughts and into someone else's world. When she arrived at the common room, she was greeted by a small group of women, all of whom looked welcoming and eager to chat. There was Carol, a woman in her early 60s who had lived at the facility for a year, and Dolores, who was in her 70s and had a sharp wit. There was also Ruth, a quiet woman in her 80s, who smiled at Emma as she took a seat. The group seemed nice, and Emma felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this could be her new community, after all. "So, Emma, what kind of books do you like?" Carol asked, her voice warm and inviting. Emma hesitated, her mind drifting back to her old bookshelf at home. She had always loved historical fiction, the stories that transported her to different times and places. But she wasn't sure if that was still her taste. Everything felt a little different now, like she was in the process of reinventing herself. "I've always enjoyed historical fiction," Emma replied, her voice soft. "But honestly, I'm open to anything." The group nodded in understanding, and the conversation flowed easily. They decided to start with a classic novel, one that most of the group had already read, and before long, Emma found herself becoming part of the conversation, contributing her thoughts. It felt good to be involved in something again, to share her opinions and ideas. It was small, but it was something. It was a connection. As the days went by, Emma continued to explore the activities at the facility. There was painting, knitting, and even a gardening club. She tried her hand at painting, though she quickly realized it wasn't something she had much talent for. But that didn't matter. It was the act of participating that mattered. It was the effort to be part of something, to feel like she still had a place in the world. One evening, as she sat in her apartment reading, she thought about Jack. She hadn't heard from him much in the past few days, and though she didn't want to seem needy, she couldn't help but feel a pang of loneliness when she thought of him. He had always been her anchor, the one who kept her grounded. Now, she had to learn to live without him by her side all the time. It wasn't easy. Her phone buzzed, and she saw that it was a message from Jack. "How's everything going, Mom? I've been thinking about you. Let me know if you need anything. I'm just a call away." Emma smiled, her heart warming at the sight of his message. She could hear his voice in the text, always so caring, always so protective. She was proud of him, of how he had turned out, but she also knew that he needed to live his life too, without feeling like he had to constantly worry about her. "I'm doing well, Jack. Settling in and getting to know the place. It's still strange, but I'm managing. Thank you for checking in. I'll be okay." She hit send and set the phone down. It felt like a small step, a sign that she was beginning to find her own way. She didn't need to rely on Jack for everything anymore. She could handle this, too. The next day, after breakfast, Emma walked through the garden, the air crisp and cool against her skin. She hadn't spent much time outside yet, but today, she felt like it was the perfect moment to do so. The roses in the garden were in full bloom, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the grayness of the sky. She found a bench beneath a large tree and sat down, closing her eyes for a moment. The world around her felt quieter here, more peaceful. There was something about nature that calmed her, that made her feel connected to something greater than herself. As she sat there, lost in the serenity of the moment, she thought about the future. She wasn't sure what it would hold. There were still days when she felt uncertain, still moments when she missed her old life. But today, sitting in that garden, she realized something important. She was still here. She was still living, still learning, still growing. This wasn't the end of anything. It was just the beginning. The days at the facility began to fall into a rhythm, one that was still new but no longer felt entirely foreign. Emma had settled into her routine. Mornings spent with a cup of tea and a good book, afternoons attending group activities, and evenings reflecting on the events of the day. It wasn't the life she had imagined for herself, but it was beginning to feel like her own. One Thursday afternoon, during the weekly book club meeting, Emma met someone who would soon become an unexpected friend. Her name was Linda, and she was a woman in her late 60s with a sharp sense of humor and an adventurous spirit that belied her years. Linda had only been at the facility for a few weeks, but she already seemed to know everyone, always with a smile on her face and a story to share. When Emma first saw her, she was talking animatedly about her travels, about the time she had spent in Europe and the small village in Italy where she had lived for a year. Emma had always dreamed of traveling, but circumstances had never allowed it. Jack had always been her priority, and her responsibilities had kept her close to home. Now, listening to Linda recount her travels, Emma felt a spark of longing and curiosity. There was so much of the world she had never seen, and at this stage in her life, she thought maybe it was time to consider the possibilities. After the meeting, Linda came over to Emma, a mischievous glint in her eye. "You know, Emma," she said, "we should take a trip together. I know it sounds crazy, but why not? Life's too short to not do the things we want to do." Emma blinked in surprise, not quite sure if Linda was serious or just being playful. But Linda's warm smile told her that she was, in fact, serious. "You've got to be kidding," Emma replied, laughing nervously. "I mean, I'm not exactly in the best shape for traveling around the world." Linda waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't worry about that. We'll take it slow. Maybe a weekend getaway first, just to get the feel of it. There's a little bed and breakfast upstate I've been wanting to visit. It's peaceful, quiet. I think you'd love it." Emma hesitated. She wasn't sure. She had gotten comfortable in her little apartment, and the thought of venturing beyond the grounds of the facility felt daunting. But there was something about Linda's enthusiasm that made her think twice. "I'll think about it," Emma said, her heart racing a bit at the idea. It wasn't just the trip that was intimidating. It was the change itself. But at the same time, there was a part of her that was intrigued. Maybe this was her chance to experience something new, to find adventure in the later years of her life. The next few days, Emma couldn't shake the idea of the trip. She thought about it during breakfast, during her walks through the garden, and even while reading in her apartment. Linda had made it sound so easy, so carefree. Maybe it wasn't as far-fetched as it seemed. Maybe she could do it. The following Wednesday, after another meeting of the book club, Emma pulled Linda aside. "Okay," she said, her voice a little shaky but filled with determination. "I'm in. Let's do it." Linda's eyes lit up with surprise and excitement. "Really? You're sure?" "I'm sure," Emma replied, smiling. "I think I need this. I've spent so much of my life thinking about what I couldn't do. Maybe now it's time to think about what I can do." The next few days were filled with planning. Linda had already made the arrangements at the bed and breakfast, and Emma was both nervous and excited as she prepared for the trip. She hadn't gone on a vacation in years, and the idea of being away from the facility, away from the familiarity of her new routine, made her stomach flutter. But as the day of the trip approached, she began to feel a sense of anticipation. This was a new beginning, a chance to step outside of her comfort zone and embrace something different. It wasn't just a weekend getaway. It was an opportunity to reclaim a part of herself that she had long forgotten. The part that had once dreamed of traveling, of experiencing new places and new things. On the day of the trip, Jack called Emma to check in, as he had been doing every couple of days. She could hear the concern in his voice when she told him about the trip. "You're really going, huh?" he asked, sounding a little skeptical. "I am," Emma replied, feeling a rush of confidence. "Linda's taking me upstate for the weekend. We're going to stay at this little inn. It'll be good for me." Jack paused, as if processing the idea. "I just don't want you to overdo it, Mom. You've only been there a few weeks, and you don't have to rush into everything." "I'll be fine, Jack," she reassured him. "I'm not rushing into anything. I'm just going to enjoy myself for a bit. I promise I'll take it easy." After their conversation, Emma felt a sense of calm wash over her. She was doing this for herself. For once, she wasn't worrying about how it would affect Jack or anyone else. She was taking this trip because it was something she wanted to do. The drive to the inn was peaceful, with Linda chatting away about the things they would do once they arrived. Emma listened, but her mind kept wandering, thinking about the changes in her life. It was incredible to think that just a few months ago, she had been living in a house full of memories, and now, here she was, on a journey with a woman she had just met, ready to embrace the unknown. As they arrived at the bed and breakfast, Emma was struck by the beauty of the place. The inn sat nestled in a valley, surrounded by rolling hills and forests. The air was crisp, and the sky was clear, as if the world itself was inviting her to breathe deeply and start fresh. Linda smiled at Emma as they stepped out of the car. "See? I told you it would be worth it." Emma couldn't help but smile back. For the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of excitement, an excitement that was hers alone. The bed and breakfast was everything Emma hadn't expected, and more. It was charming in a way that made her feel like she had stepped into another world. A world where time moved slower, and the pressures of daily life didn't seem to matter so much. The inn was tucked away in a quiet valley, surrounded by tall trees and gently rolling hills, with a large stone fireplace that crackled merrily in the common room. Emma could hear the soft hum of nature outside the windows, the chirping of birds, and the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. As they settled into their room, Linda insisted on showing Emma around the inn, eager to share every detail of the place. "There's something so magical about this place," she said, her eyes twinkling. "It's like stepping into a painting." Emma couldn't help but agree. The warmth of the fireplace and the scent of fresh pine filled the air. There was a peacefulness here that she hadn't experienced in a long time, a stark contrast to the sterile, quiet atmosphere of the facility. She found herself taking deep breaths, letting the fresh air fill her lungs, as if she were inhaling a new kind of life. As the sun began to set, Linda suggested they take a walk around the property. "Let's get a feel for the land. Trust me, the view from the top of the hill is worth the climb." Emma hesitated. She wasn't used to hiking, and the thought of walking up a hill made her feel a little anxious. But Linda's enthusiasm was contagious, and after a few moments of hesitation, Emma agreed. The walk was peaceful, the path winding through the woods and alongside a small creek that ran through the valley. The trees stood tall and proud, their leaves swaying gently in the evening breeze. It was a beautiful sight, one that made Emma feel both small and infinitely connected to the world around her. She had spent so many years focused on her own life, her own struggles, that she had forgotten the simple joy of being surrounded by nature. When they reached the top of the hill, Emma gasped in awe. The view stretched out before her, vast, open fields dotted with wildflowers, and the distant mountains that seemed to touch the sky. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and pink, casting a warm glow over everything. Emma stood there for a long time, taking in the beauty of the scene, feeling something shift inside her. She had never seen anything like this before. It was like a world she had forgotten existed, and now, here she was, witnessing it for the first time. "This is amazing," Emma said, her voice filled with wonder. "I never thought I'd see something like this." Linda smiled at her. "I knew you'd love it. Sometimes, we get so caught up in our routines that we forget how beautiful life can be." They stood in silence for a moment, just taking in the view. Emma felt a sense of peace wash over her, as if the weight of the past few months had been lifted, even if just for a while. She realized that she had been living in a bubble for so long, focused on the fear of the unknown, on what she couldn't control. But now, in this quiet moment, surrounded by beauty, she felt a sense of possibility, of things yet to be discovered. As they made their way back to the inn, Emma couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. Just a few weeks ago, she had been dreading the move to the facility, feeling as though her life was over, as though she had nothing left to offer. Now, here she was, on a trip with a new friend, experiencing the world in a way she hadn't in years. That night, as they sat in front of the fire in the common room, sipping hot cocoa, Linda looked at Emma with a knowing smile. "You're more than just a woman who's moved into a facility, Emma," she said gently. "You're a woman who's still got so much life to live. Don't forget that." Emma met Linda's gaze, a mix of gratitude and realization in her eyes. She had spent so much time feeling like her life was over, but Linda had reminded her that it was just beginning. She had so much more to discover, to experience. It wasn't the end of anything. It was just a new chapter. As the fire crackled and the warmth of the cocoa spread through her, Emma couldn't help but smile. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly alive. The future, which had once seemed so uncertain, now seemed full of possibility. The trip had given her something she hadn't known she was missing: perspective. She had spent so many years focused on the past, on what had been lost, that she had forgotten to look ahead, to see what was still out there for her. The night ended quietly, with Emma lying in bed, looking out the window at the starry sky. She realized that she didn't need to have everything figured out. All she needed to do was keep moving forward, one step at a time. The next morning, they enjoyed a leisurely breakfast, and Emma felt a sense of contentment she hadn't known in a long time. As they packed up to leave, Linda turned to Emma with a grin. "So, where to next?" Emma laughed, the sound light and free. "I don't know yet, but I'm open to finding out." The drive back from the bed and breakfast was quieter than the trip up, but in the most peaceful way possible. The countryside had left an impression on Emma that she couldn't shake. It had reminded her of how much beauty existed in the world, how many things were waiting to be discovered if she was open to them. She'd felt alive in a way she hadn't in years, and for that, she was grateful. As Linda drove, humming softly to the radio, Emma gazed out the window, reflecting on the weekend. It had been a reminder that life was still full of adventures, even if they didn't always look the way she imagined. She had spent so long thinking that her days of exploring were behind her, but this weekend had proved her wrong. Life didn't have to stop just because she had gotten older. Linda glanced over at her. "So, what do you think? Not so bad, huh?" Emma smiled, her heart still full from the trip. "Not bad at all. Actually, I think it was just what I needed." The words surprised her as they left her mouth, but she knew they were true. She hadn't realized how much she had been craving something new until she found it. Her life had been so focused on what she couldn't do, what she had to let go of. But now, for the first time, she felt like she was standing on the edge of something new, something worth pursuing. As they neared the facility, Emma felt a wave of mixed emotions. She was glad to be returning to the comfort of her room and the familiarity of the routines she had come to rely on. But at the same time, she knew something had shifted. She wasn't the same woman who had left for the trip. She wasn't just an elderly woman settling into a new chapter. She was a woman with a renewed sense of possibility, a woman who had seen the world beyond the walls she had built around herself. When they pulled into the parking lot, Linda turned to her. "Well, here we are. Back to reality." Emma chuckled. "Yeah, but I think I can handle it now." As they unloaded their things from the car, Linda's eyes twinkled. "So, what's next, Emma? Are you going to keep exploring, or is this just a one-time thing?" Emma paused, considering the question. It was easy to say, just a one-time thing, and settle back into her old life. But something deep inside her urged her to be more. To take the things she had learned from this weekend and apply them to her everyday life. She had so much more to give, and so much more to experience. "I don't know yet," Emma replied honestly, "but I think I'm ready to find out." That afternoon, as Emma returned to her room, she felt a sense of contentment wash over her. She had not only discovered new places, but she had also discovered parts of herself that had been dormant for far too long. The trip had been an awakening, one that would stay with her for the rest of her life. Later that evening, Jack called, as he did every day. She could tell he was eager to hear about her trip. "So, how was it?" he asked, his voice filled with curiosity. "It was amazing, Jack," Emma said, her voice thick with emotion. "It was exactly what I needed. I think I'm starting to see things differently now." Jack was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad to hear that, Mom. I really am." The conversation shifted to other topics, but Emma's mind kept returning to the weekend. She hadn't just gone away for a few days. She had stepped into a new phase of her life, one where the possibilities were endless. The next few weeks at the facility were filled with the usual routine, but Emma felt a shift in herself. She was more present, more engaged with the activities she participated in. She had reconnected with the staff and the residents in ways she hadn't before, and there was a new sense of lightness in her interactions. She no longer viewed the facility as a place of confinement, but as a place where she could still experience life, make new connections, and, most importantly, grow. One afternoon, as she sat with Linda in the common room, sipping tea, they discussed the possibility of another trip. "What do you think?" Linda asked, her voice full of mischief. "Somewhere new, maybe?" Emma smiled, her eyes twinkling. "I think that sounds like a great idea, but this time, we should plan for more than just a weekend." Linda grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that." The idea of traveling again, of exploring more of the world, had begun to take root in Emma's heart. There was so much to see, so much to experience, and she was ready to embrace it all. As Emma left the common room later that afternoon, she looked out at the garden, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. She had discovered something important about herself over the past few weeks, something that had been hidden beneath the layers of fear and doubt she had built up over the years. She was still capable of so much more. She could still explore, still grow, still create new memories. For the first time in a long time, Emma felt truly free. Have you ever had a moment where you realized your potential for growth and exploration, no matter your age or stage in life? What motivated you to take that step? Share your story with us. The weeks that followed Emma's return to the facility were filled with subtle shifts. She started to find joy in the smallest things again. The morning light streaming through her window seemed brighter, and the sound of laughter in the common room filled her with a quiet sense of belonging. The new perspective she had gained during her trip didn't fade. It lingered, growing stronger with each passing day. One afternoon, as she sat in the sunroom reading, a familiar face appeared in the doorway. It was Karen, one of the nurses who had worked with Emma since she arrived at the facility. Karen was always kind, always patient, but she had a way of making Emma feel as though she wasn't just another resident. She was someone who mattered. "Emma," Karen called softly, her voice warm, "I've got something for you." Emma looked up from her book and smiled. "What's this?" Karen stepped forward and handed her an envelope, sealed with a wax stamp. "A letter for you. It arrived this morning, and I thought it might be important." Emma took the letter, her curiosity piqued. "Thank you, Karen. I'll read it right away." Karen gave her a reassuring smile before leaving Emma to open the envelope. The wax seal broke easily, and Emma unfolded the letter inside. As she read, her eyes widened in surprise. The letter was from a woman named Claire Thompson, the owner of a local art gallery. Claire explained that she had been introduced to Emma's story through a mutual acquaintance, someone who had heard about her journey of rediscovery. Claire had seen the photographs from the trip to the bed and breakfast, the pictures Emma had shared of the beautiful landscapes and the quiet moments of reflection. "I believe there's a lot more to your story than just the pictures," Claire had written. "I would love to meet you and discuss the possibility of showcasing your work. Not just your photographs, but your story, your journey of transformation. I think there's something here that would resonate with a lot of people." Emma's heart skipped a beat as she finished reading the letter. A gallery showing? An opportunity to share her experiences through her photos and her story? It seemed too good to be true. At first, she hesitated. She wasn't sure if she was ready to step into the spotlight, to expose herself in such a vulnerable way. But then she remembered the way she had felt standing on that hilltop, looking at the world with fresh eyes. She remembered how her trip had opened her heart to new possibilities, and how she had discovered a strength she hadn't known she had. Maybe, just maybe, this was another opportunity to grow. The next morning, Emma called Claire. She could feel her palms sweating as she dialed the number, but when Claire answered, her voice was warm and welcoming. "I'm so glad you called, Emma," Claire said. "I've heard such wonderful things about you, and I truly believe your story could inspire so many people." Emma's heart swelled at the kind words. "Thank you, Claire. I'm honored by the offer, but I have to admit, I'm a little nervous about putting myself out there like this." "I understand completely," Claire replied. "But what I've seen of your work, your photos, your journey, it's powerful. People need to see that. They need to hear your story. And you're not alone in this. I'll be with you every step of the way."
Emma took a deep breath. For the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of excitement. Maybe it was time to share her journey with the world. Maybe this was the next step in her transformation. "I'll do it," Emma said, the words coming out with a confidence she hadn't expected. "I'm ready." As the weeks went by, Emma and Claire worked together to plan the exhibit. It wasn't just about showcasing Emma's photographs, it was about telling the story of a woman who had found herself again, who had learned that life doesn't end with age, and that there is always room for growth, change, and new beginnings. The exhibit was set to open in a month, and Emma couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and nervousness. She had spent so much time feeling invisible, like her life was just a collection of moments that no one would ever notice. But now, her story was going to be seen by others, heard, understood, and hopefully, appreciated. In the weeks leading up to the opening, Emma spent hours going through her photographs, selecting the ones that best captured her journey. She picked pictures of landscapes that had moved her, of quiet moments she had shared with Linda, and of herself, small and fragile, yet resilient, standing tall in the face of uncertainty. Each photo told a part of her story, a story of hope, courage, and rediscovery. On the day of the exhibit, Emma felt her heart racing as she prepared to step into the gallery. She had spent so much time doubting her worth, her ability to share her voice. But today, she was stepping into the light, ready to show the world the woman she had become. When she arrived at the gallery, she was greeted by Claire, who was beaming with excitement. "Emma, you look amazing," Claire said, taking her hand and leading her through the space. "Everything's ready for you." Emma was amazed at how beautiful the gallery looked. Her photographs adorned the walls, each one framed with care and displayed with the utmost respect. As she walked through the space, she felt a deep sense of pride. These images were hers, but they were also part of a much bigger story. A story of change, of courage, and of hope. The event was a success beyond Emma's expectations. People came from all over, drawn by her story and the power of her photographs. Many of them shared their own experiences of transformation, and Emma was touched by the connections she made that night. When the evening drew to a close, Emma stood in front of her favorite photograph, the one of herself standing on that hilltop, looking out at the world with open eyes. She realized, in that moment, that she wasn't just sharing a part of her life with the world. She was giving others permission to embrace their own stories, to find beauty in the most unexpected places, and to always keep moving forward, no matter how uncertain the journey might seem. The days following the gallery opening were a whirlwind. Emma had spent the past few weeks adjusting to the unexpected attention her exhibit had brought. It wasn't just about the success of the show anymore, it was about the messages, the conversations, and the deep connections she was making with people she had never met before. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Visitors to the gallery left comments about how her photos had touched them, how they resonated with her journey, and how her story reminded them that it's never too late to find meaning and purpose in life. Many had even shared their own personal stories with Emma, revealing struggles, fears, and triumphs of their own. It was humbling, and Emma couldn't help but feel that her life had truly come full circle. The woman who had once thought her best years were behind her was now inspiring others to take their own steps toward rediscovery. But it wasn't just the visitors to the gallery who were affected by her story. The ripple effect of her transformation had reached farther than she could have imagined. One afternoon, as Emma sat in the common room with Linda, a letter arrived for her. It was thick, heavy, and unfamiliar. The handwriting on the envelope was elegant, almost old-fashioned. Emma's curiosity piqued, and she tore it open to find a letter from Jack's childhood friend, Marcus. The letter was simple but heartfelt. Dear Emma, I've been following your journey through your photos and the stories you've shared. I want you to know that your transformation has made a lasting impact on me. I've been struggling for some time, feeling like I've lost my way, but after seeing your exhibit, I realized I'm not alone. Your courage to embrace change has inspired me to seek help and start a new chapter in my own life. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late. Warmest regards, Marcus. Emma sat back in her chair, the letter trembling slightly in her hands. She had no idea that her story could reach someone like Marcus, who had been a friend of Jack's for years. He had always seemed so put together, so confident, but reading his words made her realize that everyone, no matter how strong they seemed on the outside, could benefit from a little inspiration. Linda, who had been sitting across from her, noticed the quiet pause. What's that, Emma? Emma handed her the letter, and Linda read it in silence. When she finished, she looked up, her eyes soft. Wow. That's incredible. You never know who you're going to touch with your story. Emma nodded, her heart full. I had no idea that something as simple as sharing my journey could make a difference in someone else's life. It feels surreal. Isn't that the power of storytelling? Linda smiled. It doesn't just help us heal, it helps others too. You've given so much already, Emma. Emma thought about Marcus' words for the rest of the day. His letter had made her realize that her transformation wasn't just for her, it was for everyone who needed to hear it. She was no longer just living for herself. Her journey had become part of something bigger, a shared experience that others could use to fuel their own growth. The next day, Emma decided to write back to Marcus. She thanked him for his letter, expressing how deeply moved she was that her story had reached him in such a personal way. She told him that she understood how it felt to be stuck, to feel like change was impossible. But she also reminded him, as she had learned on her own journey, that the first step toward change was simply believing it was possible. As the weeks went on, Emma received more letters and messages from people she had never met. Many of them came from people who had seen the gallery show, while others were friends of friends who had heard about Emma's story and felt compelled to reach out. Some asked for advice on how to take the first step toward their own transformations, while others shared how Emma's courage had helped them take their own. Emma began to see herself not just as an elderly woman in a facility, but as a bridge between the past and the future, between despair and hope. She realized that by embracing her own growth, by confronting her fears and pushing through them, she had become a beacon for others to do the same. One afternoon, a woman named Sarah came to visit her. She was a former resident of the facility, someone Emma had met years ago. Sarah had left the facility to live on her own, but she had heard about Emma's exhibit and wanted to come by to thank her in person. I saw your photos at the gallery, Sarah said, her voice full of emotion. I can't even begin to tell you how much they moved me. You've shown me that it's never too late to take control of your life, to find your purpose. I've been thinking about starting my own art project, something I've always wanted to do, but never had the courage to try. But after seeing your story, I'm going to do it. Thank you, Emma. You've given me the push I needed. Emma was speechless. She had no idea that her photos had inspired someone so deeply, and she was humbled by Sarah's words. I'm just glad my story could help, she said, her voice filled with gratitude. But you're the one who's going to make it happen, Sarah. You just have to believe in yourself. As the weeks passed, Emma's story continued to ripple outward, touching lives in ways she never expected. She was no longer just a woman looking back on her life, she was someone who was actively shaping the future, not just for herself, but for others as well. She had found her voice, and through that, she had given others the courage to find theirs. As Emma's journey continued to unfold, the ripples of her story began to expand even further. Her photos, once mere snapshots of fleeting moments, had become symbols of resilience and the beauty of second chances. She had started to feel a sense of purpose that she hadn't experienced in years, a feeling that wasn't just tied to the gallery or her newfound fame, but to something deeper. She was now, more than ever, connected to the world around her in ways she hadn't thought possible. One cool autumn afternoon, Emma was sitting in the facility's small garden, enjoying the peaceful surroundings. She had taken to spending more time outside lately, finding solace in the rustling of the leaves and the warmth of the sun on her face. Her mind often wandered to the many people whose lives had intersected with hers in unexpected ways since her exhibit. Each new letter, each new story shared with her, reminded her that life had a way of surprising her when she least expected it. As she sat there, lost in thought, a voice broke through her reverie. "Excuse me, are you Emma Thompson?" Emma turned to see a man standing in front of her, a tall figure dressed in a sharp suit. His demeanor was professional, but his expression carried an air of curiosity. He seemed somewhat out of place in the serene garden, and for a moment, Emma wondered if she knew him. "Yes, I'm Emma," she replied, offering a warm smile. "Can I help you?" The man hesitated for a moment before extending his hand. "My name is Michael Simmons. I work for a local publishing company, and I've been following your story. Your journey, your photos, they've made quite an impact." Emma's eyebrows lifted in surprise. "A publishing company? I'm not sure what I've done to attract attention from a publisher." Michael chuckled softly. "You'd be surprised. Your story is one that resonates deeply with people. We've been looking for stories just like yours, stories of transformation, of resilience, of starting over. I believe there's a book here, Emma. A book that could inspire so many people who are in the same place you were before your journey began." Emma's heart skipped a beat. A book? She had never considered writing a memoir or sharing her story in that way. The thought of putting everything down on paper was overwhelming, and yet, there was something compelling about Michael's words. "I'm flattered," Emma said, trying to mask the sudden nervousness she felt. "But I'm not a writer. I'm just a woman who took a trip and took some pictures." Michael's smile remained kind, but there was an undeniable sincerity in his eyes. "Emma, you've already written your story through your photos, through the way you've shared your journey. People are connecting with your experience on a personal level. You don't need to be a writer to share your story. We can help you with that. All you need to do is tell us your truth, and we'll help bring it to life." Emma felt a swell of emotions, fear, excitement, uncertainty. Could she really do this? Could she take the vulnerable pieces of herself and transform them into a book? The idea of writing about her life, her struggles, and her triumphs, felt like opening a door she wasn't sure she was ready to walk through. But deep down, she knew that if there was one thing she had learned, it was that she could face the unknown. After a long pause, she finally nodded. "I'm willing to listen. Tell me more." Over the next few weeks, Emma and Michael met regularly to discuss the idea of the book. Michael had already outlined a potential structure, one that would weave together Emma's photographs with stories from her life. It wasn't just going to be a collection of pictures, it would be a memoir of sorts, a reflection on her transformation and the lessons she had learned along the way. Emma had her doubts, but with each meeting, she felt herself growing more confident. She had never shared so much of herself with anyone, but something about Michael's approach made her feel safe. He wasn't just interested in selling a book, he was genuinely passionate about telling her story in a way that would resonate with others. Together, they began to piece together the narrative, starting with the pivotal moments of Emma's life, the struggles she had faced, and the quiet moments of self-discovery that had brought her to where she was today. Writing the book wasn't easy. At times, it felt like she was digging through old wounds, unearthing memories that she had buried long ago. But with each chapter, Emma felt a weight lifting off her shoulders. She was no longer just telling her story for herself, she was telling it for others, for anyone who needed to hear that it was never too late to start again. One day, as they were going over a particularly emotional chapter, Emma paused, looking up at Michael. "I never imagined that I'd be doing this," she said quietly. "That I'd be sharing this much of myself." Michael smiled gently. "That's the power of your story, Emma. You're not just sharing your life. You're giving people permission to share theirs. You're giving them hope that they can start over, no matter where they are in life." Emma sat back in her chair, absorbing his words. She realized that he was right. This book was more than just her story, it was a beacon for others. A reminder that no matter how far you've fallen or how lost you've felt, you could always choose to rise again. The writing process stretched on for months, but with each passing week, Emma's connection to her own story grew stronger. She had moments of doubt, of course, moments when she wondered if anyone would care about the woman who had once felt invisible. But every time she thought about giving up, she remembered the letters, the people who had been touched by her journey. And that kept her going. Finally, the manuscript was complete. Emma felt a mix of relief and exhilaration as she sat down to read the final draft. It was a strange feeling, looking at the words on the page. She could see herself in them, all the pain, the growth, the beauty. She had told her story in full. "Are you ready for this?" Michael asked one final time, as they prepared to send the manuscript off to the publisher. Emma took a deep breath, her heart racing. But this time, she wasn't afraid. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "I'm ready." The day the publisher accepted Emma's manuscript was a day she would never forget. It was more than just a validation of her hard work, it was a testament to everything she had overcome. The woman who had once feared she had no future, no place in the world, was now about to share her story with thousands of people. She marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment, but she knew that the true work was just beginning. As the months passed, Emma's book, Through the Lens of Change, was edited, designed, and prepared for its official release. She spent hours reviewing drafts, choosing photos that would accompany the text, and discussing the marketing plan with the publisher. Each step of the process was a mix of excitement and anxiety. She had never imagined that her life would take this turn, and now that it was happening, it felt surreal. One of the most difficult parts of the journey was preparing for the book's release event. It was scheduled for a cozy local bookstore, and Emma had agreed to do a reading, something she never thought she would be able to do. Public speaking had always terrified her, and now she was expected to speak in front of a crowd of strangers. The thought made her stomach turn, but she also knew that this was part of the process. She had spent so long hiding from the world, and now she was embracing it. Linda, ever supportive, had been with Emma through every step of the journey. She encouraged Emma to practice the reading at the facility, to get comfortable with the words, before the big day. "You've done the hard part already," Linda said one afternoon as they sat in the common room. "Now you just need to speak from the heart. Remember, your story is powerful. People want to hear it." Emma nodded, trying to steady her nerves. "I'm still not sure I can do it, Linda. What if I freeze? What if I can't even get the words out?" "You won't freeze," Linda said with a smile. "You're stronger than you think. And if you do freeze, so what? Just take a breath and keep going. They're not there to judge you." They're there to hear your story. Emma couldn't help but smile at her friend's confidence. Linda had been a constant source of strength and reassurance throughout the process. Without her support, Emma wasn't sure she would have made it this far. The day of the book release arrived, and Emma stood in front of the mirror in her apartment, staring at her reflection. She was dressed in a simple, yet elegant, outfit, something that made her feel confident, but not too out of place. Her heart was racing, but she reminded herself that she had worked hard to get to this point. This was her moment, and she was going to own it. When she arrived at the bookstore, she was greeted by the publisher and the event organizers. The room was warm and inviting, filled with shelves of books, comfortable seating, and a small stage where Emma would be reading. There were a few people already milling about, chatting excitedly, but Emma felt her nerves flare again as she saw the crowd start to grow. The publisher led her to the stage, and Emma took a deep breath as she stepped up to the microphone. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone, but she quickly found her footing. She smiled at the audience, a mix of familiar faces and strangers, and began her reading. At first, the words felt foreign on her tongue. She stumbled slightly, but she forced herself to slow down, to breathe. As she read through the first few paragraphs, she found her rhythm. The more she read, the more she felt connected to the words, to the story she had shared in the book. She wasn't just speaking to a room full of people, she was speaking to herself, reminding herself of how far she had come. When she finished the reading, there was a moment of silence before the room erupted in applause. Emma's heart soared as she realized that the people in the room were not just clapping for her words, they were clapping for her courage, for her willingness to share her journey. The book signing portion of the event was equally overwhelming. People lined up to get their books signed, some sharing their personal stories with Emma, others simply offering words of encouragement. Emma listened to each one, feeling a deep sense of connection with every person who came up to her. She realized that the power of her story wasn't just in the words she had written, it was in the way it had touched others, in the way it had given them hope. After the event, Emma sat alone in the bookstore for a moment, reflecting on the journey. The nervousness she had felt earlier had melted away, replaced by a sense of peace. She had done it. She had shared her story with the world, and it had made a difference. As Emma walked back to the facility that evening, the world felt different. There was a new lightness in her step, a new sense of possibility. She had been afraid of change, of the unknown, but now she understood that change wasn't something to fear. It was something to embrace. The next day, Emma received another letter, this one from a woman named Clara. Clara's letter was short but powerful. Dear Emma, your book has changed my life. I've been stuck in a rut for years, and after reading your story, I finally realized that I can start over. I'm going to take the leap and follow my dreams. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late. With gratitude, Clara. Emma sat down in her chair, the letter trembling in her hands. She had received many letters over the past few months, but this one felt different. Clara's words were a reminder that her story wasn't just a one-time thing. It was a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever felt lost or unsure of their future. As Emma gazed out the window, she realized that her life had truly come full circle. She had gone from feeling invisible and irrelevant to becoming a source of inspiration for others. And the best part? She knew that this was only the beginning. The days following the book release event were a whirlwind. Emma had received more messages, letters, and phone calls than she could keep up with. Some people shared their gratitude for the inspiration she had given them, while others simply expressed how much they related to her story. Each message reminded her that her journey had touched hearts in ways she hadn't fully understood until now. It was humbling to know that her words, her life, could have such a deep impact on others. One afternoon, as Emma sat in her small apartment reading through some of the letters, she noticed one that was different from the others. It was from a woman named Sarah, someone Emma had never met. She opened it slowly, curious about what the letter would say. Dear Emma, I can't begin to express how much your book has meant to me. I've been in a similar situation, feeling stuck, lost, and unsure of what to do with my life. But your story made me realize that it's never too late to change. I'm writing because I need your help. You see, I'm about to take a leap of my own, leave everything behind and move across the country to start fresh. But I'm scared. What if it doesn't work out? What if I regret it? I know you've been where I am, and I was hoping you might share some advice, something to help me take that first step. I can't tell you how much it would mean to me to hear from you. With all my thanks. Sarah. Emma set the letter down, her heart heavy with empathy. She had felt those same fears before, doubts that kept her from moving forward, from embracing the unknown. She remembered the months of uncertainty when she had first come to the decision to leave her old life behind. The fear of making a mistake, of not knowing what would come next, had almost paralyzed her. But now, as she read Sarah's letter, Emma realized just how much she had learned in the process. It was one thing to write about change, but it was another thing entirely to live it. And perhaps, it was time for her to share that wisdom. Emma picked up her phone and typed a message to Sarah. She took a deep breath before pressing send. Dear Sarah. I understand your fears completely. I've been there too. The thing about change is that it's never easy, but it's always worth it. When I decided to leave my old life behind, I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew that staying where I was wasn't an option anymore. The first step is always the hardest, but it's also the most important. It's the step that tells you that you're ready for something different. You don't need to have everything figured out before you take that leap. Sometimes, the best thing you can do is trust yourself. Trust that you are stronger than you realize, and that no matter what happens, you'll find your way. And remember, it's never too late to start over. I wish you the best of luck, and I know you'll find the courage to take that first step. With warmth and encouragement. Emma. She paused for a moment, looking at the message on her screen. It felt right, like the words were coming from a place deep within her, a place that had been shaped by all the lessons she had learned over the past year. She hit send, then leaned back in her chair, reflecting on how far she had come. Just a year ago, she had been a woman lost in her own life, uncertain of where to go or what to do. Now, she was offering advice to someone else, sharing the wisdom she had earned the hard way. As Emma continued to process Sarah's letter, she realized that her story had become more than just a personal journey. It had become a bridge for others, a way for people to connect with each other and share their own experiences. The ripple effect of her decision to open up and embrace change had reached far beyond anything she could have imagined. The next morning, as Emma went about her usual routine, she received another message. This time, it was from Linda, her ever-supportive friend. Hey Emma. I'm so proud of you. You're really making a difference out there. I was thinking, maybe it's time for you to start speaking at more events. You've got a powerful story, and I think people would love to hear it live. What do you think? Emma felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The idea of speaking at more events was both thrilling and terrifying. But as she thought about it, she realized that this was yet another opportunity for growth. She had already taken the first big step by writing the book and doing her first reading. Now, maybe it was time to take things further, to speak to a larger audience and share her story face to face. She picked up her phone and called Linda. I think you're right, Emma said, her voice shaking slightly with the weight of the decision. I think it's time. I'm ready to take that next step. Linda's voice was full of excitement. That's the spirit. You've got this, Emma. I know you do. Over the next few weeks, Emma began to receive invitations to speak at various events. She spoke at local community centers, book clubs, and even a few corporate seminars. Each time she stood in front of a group, she felt a new sense of empowerment. Her voice, once so uncertain, was now confident and steady. She had found her calling, not just as an author, but as someone who could help others believe in themselves. But it wasn't just the speaking engagements that were changing Emma. It was the way she viewed herself and her life. Every time she shared her story, she felt more and more like the person she had always wanted to be, the woman who had the courage to embrace change, to take risks, and to inspire others to do the same. As she looked out over the crowd at her most recent speaking event, Emma couldn't help but smile. She had come a long way from the woman who had feared even stepping out of her comfort zone. And now, she was sharing her story with the world, helping others take the first steps toward their own transformations. Have you ever been afraid to take the first step toward change? What would it take for you to step out of your comfort zone? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's encourage each other to take that leap. Emma's life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. What had started as a simple idea, writing a book, had blossomed into something much bigger, a career as a motivational speaker, a deeper connection to her own heart, and an understanding that her purpose was far beyond what she had once thought. Yet, as much as Emma had grown, there were still moments when the old fears crept in. The familiar pang of self-doubt would return, whispering that maybe this wasn't the right path after all. The fear of failure, of not being good enough, would resurface. But each time, Emma faced it head-on, reminding herself that she had already come so far, and that these fears were simply stepping stones to something greater. One evening, as Emma sat in her apartment reflecting on all the changes in her life, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Sarah, the woman she had helped earlier with her own fears of change. Dear Emma, I wanted to share an update with you. After reading your letter, I decided to take the leap. I moved across the country to start fresh, just like you said. The first few weeks have been challenging, new city, new people, new everything. There are days when I want to turn back, when I feel overwhelmed and unsure. But I keep reminding myself of what you said, trust myself, take it one step at a time, and know that it's never too late. I can't thank you enough for your encouragement. It's been harder than I imagined, but I know I'm on the right path. I'm learning to embrace the unknown, and I'm starting to see the possibilities that come with it. With gratitude, Sarah. Emma read the message several times, her heart swelling with pride. Sarah had taken the leap, just as Emma had done, and though the journey wasn't easy, it was clear that Sarah was learning to trust herself and move forward, despite the challenges. Emma knew that this wasn't just about Sarah's journey anymore. It was about something much bigger, the collective power of people coming together, supporting one another, and sharing their stories to inspire growth. The next morning, Emma woke up to a new day filled with opportunities. She had another speaking engagement lined up, this time at a conference for women's empowerment. The thought of speaking in front of a large audience still made her nervous, but there was also a sense of excitement. She had learned that she could handle whatever came her way. The unknown didn't have to be something to fear, it could be a chance to grow. As Emma prepared for her talk, she looked back at the many women she had met along her journey. She thought of Linda, who had always been her rock, her constant support through every phase of her transformation. She thought of the letters she had received, especially Sarah's, and how each person's story had intertwined with her own. Emma realized that her purpose wasn't just about telling her story, it was about giving others the courage to tell theirs, too. She arrived at the conference and took a deep breath as she walked into the large auditorium. The room was filled with women from all walks of life, some older, some younger, some just beginning their journey, others who had already made strides. Emma could feel the collective energy of the room, a sense of shared experience and strength. She knew that, despite her nerves, she was exactly where she was meant to be. When it was her turn to speak, she walked confidently to the podium. The microphone stood before her, and as she adjusted it, she felt a wave of calm wash over her. She had done this before. She had faced the unknown, and now, she was ready to do it again. Good morning, everyone, she began, her voice steady but warm. I want to start by telling you a story, not just mine, but a story that I believe many of us share. It's a story about fear. About the feeling that we're not enough, that we'll never make it, that the changes we want to make are too big, too impossible. She paused, looking out over the crowd. She saw women nodding, faces full of understanding. She knew she wasn't alone. For a long time, she continued, I was paralyzed by those same fears. I was stuck in a life that didn't bring me joy, unsure of how to move forward. I thought it was too late for me to change. But then I realized, change doesn't have to happen all at once. It happens in small steps. It happens when we take a leap, even when we don't know what the landing will look like. Emma smiled, her confidence growing as she spoke. She shared her journey, the doubts, the struggles, and the triumphs. She talked about how every challenge she had faced had ultimately led to a stronger version of herself, someone who was no longer afraid to embrace the unknown. As she finished her talk, the room erupted in applause. Emma could hardly believe it. These women, who were just like her in so many ways, had connected with her message. She had touched their hearts in the same way that her own heart had been touched by those who shared their stories with her. After the speech, women came up to Emma, thanking her for her words and sharing their own journeys of transformation. It was overwhelming, humbling, and beautiful. Each woman's story was different, but they all shared a common thread, the desire to change, to take that first step, and to trust themselves. As Emma left the conference, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was what it was all about. It wasn't just about her story anymore. It was about the collective power of shared experiences, the way each person's journey could inspire someone else to take that leap. That night, as Emma lay in bed, she reflected on everything she had accomplished. She had faced the unknown so many times, and each time, she had come out stronger. The fear that once held her back no longer had power over her. Instead, it had become a fuel for growth, a catalyst for change. She thought about Sarah, about Linda, and about all the other women she had met along the way. Emma realized that life was full of unknowns, but that was what made it beautiful. The future wasn't something to fear, it was something to embrace. The months following the conference were a blur of events, writing, and self-reflection. Emma's life had taken a path she never could have predicted when she had first set out to write her book. She had gone from someone unsure of her future to someone who was now inspiring others to take risks, face their fears, and embrace change. It was an overwhelming sense of accomplishment, but there were still moments of doubt that lingered in her heart. One evening, after a long day of speaking at yet another event, Emma returned to her apartment. It had been a good day, her talk had gone well, and the audience had responded positively. But as she sat down at her desk to go through her messages, she felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She was grateful for the progress she had made, but she couldn't ignore the part of her that wondered if she was truly living the life she had imagined. She glanced at her calendar, another speaking engagement in a few days, another round of book signings, and more interviews. It felt like she was constantly moving, constantly giving pieces of herself away to others. As much as she enjoyed it, there was a part of her that longed for quiet, for solitude, for a break from the hustle. Just as she was beginning to feel overwhelmed, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Linda. Hey, Emma. I know you've been super busy lately, but I wanted to remind you to take care of yourself too. You've been giving so much to others, but don't forget about your own needs. How about a weekend getaway? Somewhere peaceful. Just you, some time to recharge, and no agenda. You've earned it. Emma smiled as she read the message. Linda always knew what to say. Emma had been so focused on her work and helping others that she hadn't taken the time to care for herself. The idea of a quiet weekend away sounded like exactly what she needed. After a moment of consideration, Emma responded. You're right. I think I need a break. I'm going to book a weekend retreat. Thanks for the reminder, Linda. You're the best. That weekend, Emma drove to a small, secluded cabin in the mountains. It was a simple place, no frills, no distractions, just the sound of nature surrounding her. She spent her days hiking, reading, and journaling. It was a gift she had given herself, a chance to reconnect with her inner self, away from the noise of the world. During one of her hikes, Emma reached a spot on the trail where she could see the valley below. She sat on a rock, taking in the view, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to simply be. No pressure to perform, no expectations, just the peace of the moment. As she sat there, a thought crossed her mind. She had spent so much of her life trying to prove something, to herself and to others. But now, she realized, she didn't need to prove anything. She had already done the hard work of transforming her life. She had faced the unknown, stepped into her fears, and come out stronger. And now, it was time to live in the present, to appreciate all that she had accomplished, and to look forward to what was next without feeling like she had to rush toward it. Emma spent the rest of the weekend reflecting on what she wanted for her future. She didn't need to have all the answers right now. What mattered most was that she was living authentically, that she was doing the work that fulfilled her, and that she was embracing whatever came next with open arms. When she returned home, Emma felt a renewed sense of clarity. She didn't have to constantly chase after the next big thing. She could take things one step at a time, continue sharing her story, and trust that the right opportunities would come when the time was right. As the weeks passed, Emma began to approach her work with a new perspective. She still spoke at events and wrote, but she no longer felt the need to overschedule herself. She took more time for herself, whether it was a quiet afternoon with a book or a walk in the park. She learned that self-care wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. And by taking care of herself, she was better able to show up for others. One day, while meeting with a group of aspiring writers, Emma found herself sharing her journey with them once again. As she spoke, she realized just how far she had come. She was no longer that woman standing at the edge of the unknown, too afraid to take the leap. She had already jumped, had already soared, and now, she was ready to help others do the same. "Take it one step at a time," she said to the group, her voice filled with the wisdom of experience. "Don't rush the process. The most important thing is to trust yourself and believe that the right opportunities will come. You don't have to have everything figured out. Just keep moving forward, one step at a time." Later that evening, as Emma sat down to write in her journal, she reflected on the advice she had just given. She realized that it was true for her as well. She didn't have to have it all figured out. She just needed to keep moving forward, trusting that the next chapter of her life was already unfolding. Emma's journey had not been easy, but it had been worth it. She had faced her fears, embraced the unknown, and discovered her true purpose along the way. And as she closed her journal that night, she felt a sense of peace, knowing that whatever came next, she was ready for it. The weeks following Emma's weekend retreat were a time of steady growth and deep reflection. Her mindset had shifted, she no longer felt the pressure to constantly be working toward the next goal. Instead, she embraced the idea that the journey itself was the destination. She was learning to savor each step, to appreciate the lessons she gained along the way, and to trust that everything would fall into place. Despite the peace she had found, there was still a small part of her that questioned what more she could achieve. Emma often wondered if she was truly making an impact, if the work she was doing was enough. She knew that her talks and books had touched lives, but the desire to do more, to reach more people, was still there. One afternoon, as Emma sipped tea on her balcony, her phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from a well-known publishing house. She hesitated for a moment before opening it. She had received so many emails in the past that promised big things but never followed through. However, this one was different. The subject line read, "Your story, your voice, a potential collaboration." Her heart raced as she opened the email, reading through it carefully. The publishing house wanted to collaborate with her on a new project, something that would expand her influence even further. They had been following her work and felt that her message resonated with a broader audience. It was an exciting opportunity, but it also came with a lot of pressure. Was she ready to take on such a big project? She stared at the email for a while, weighing the possibilities. On one hand, this could be the next step in her journey, a way to reach more people and make an even greater impact. On the other hand, it could pull her away from the peace and balance she had worked so hard to cultivate. She knew that this decision was one of those pivotal moments, one of those choices that would shape her future. After much consideration, Emma replied to the email, expressing her interest but also asking for more details about the project. She wanted to make sure that it aligned with her values and allowed her to maintain the sense of authenticity she had built. She didn't want to lose herself in the process of growing her brand or expanding her reach. A few days later, she received a response with more information. The project involved creating a multimedia platform that combined her motivational speaking, her written work, and interactive workshops for people looking to make significant life changes. It was ambitious, but it also seemed like the perfect way to reach people in a deeper, more personal way. Still, there was a part of Emma that hesitated. She had worked so hard to find balance in her life, to give herself the time to rest and reflect. She didn't want to sacrifice that for the sake of success. But after discussing the opportunity with Linda, who reminded her that she didn't have to take on the project all at once, Emma realized that it could be done on her own terms. She didn't have to give up everything she had gained to achieve more. She agreed to move forward with the project, but with one condition: she would take it at her own pace, ensuring that her well-being and peace of mind remained a priority. The publishing house agreed, and Emma felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She wasn't saying yes to the project, she was saying yes to creating something that truly aligned with her values, her purpose, and her needs. In the months that followed, Emma began working on the new platform. It was a lot of work, but it was also a joy. She found herself reconnecting with her creativity in ways she hadn't expected. The platform allowed her to share not just her story, but the stories of others, to inspire and uplift in a way that felt truly meaningful. Emma knew that she was on the right path, and every step she took felt like an affirmation of that. As the platform grew, so did Emma's understanding of herself and her purpose. She had begun this journey with a desire to help others, but now, she was learning that it wasn't just about helping others. It was about helping herself, too. By sharing her story and giving others the space to share theirs, Emma had created a community of growth, connection, and authenticity. It wasn't about having all the answers, it was about coming together, embracing the unknown, and taking it one step at a time. One evening, as she sat in her office, reviewing the feedback from the platform's first round of workshops, Emma felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She had built something that was more than just a project, it was a movement. She was helping people face their fears, take risks, and embrace the unknown, just as she had done all those months ago. And in doing so, she had found a deeper sense of peace and purpose in her own life. As Emma closed her laptop and reflected on all she had accomplished, she thought back to that moment in the mountains when she had sat on the rock and realized that the journey was the destination. Now, she understood what that truly meant. The work she was doing, the connections she had made, and the lessons she had learned along the way had brought her to this moment, not the end of the journey, but a new chapter, one filled with possibility, growth, and, most importantly, peace. Have you ever taken on a big project or opportunity that required you to find balance in your life? How did you manage to stay true to yourself while pursuing your dreams? Share your thoughts in the comments below. As the new platform grew, Emma was not only reaching more people, but was also witnessing the ripple effect of her work. Her words were inspiring others to take their own leaps of faith, to challenge their fears, and to step into their true selves. It was humbling to see the impact she was having, but Emma didn't take credit for it. She knew that the transformation was happening within the people who took part in her workshops and read her book. One afternoon, as Emma scrolled through messages on her platform, she came across a post that stood out. It was a message from a woman named Grace, who had been a part of Emma's first group of participants in the interactive workshop series. Grace had shared a heartfelt story about how Emma's work had inspired her to finally leave a toxic job and pursue her dream of becoming a photographer. Her post was raw, vulnerable, and filled with gratitude. "I just wanted to say thank you. I can't even begin to explain how much your words changed my life. I was stuck in a job I hated, feeling like I had no choice but to stay. But after taking your workshop, I realized that I was the one holding myself back. I quit my job yesterday, and I'm finally going after my dream. I'm scared, but I'm doing it. I'm taking that leap, just like you taught me." Emma sat in silence as she read the post, feeling a deep sense of pride and humility. This wasn't just about her success, it was about the transformation happening in the lives of others. Emma realized that the power of her story was not just in the book she had written or the workshops she held, but in the courage she inspired in others to change their own stories. She replied to Grace's post, offering her congratulations and encouragement. Emma couldn't help but smile as she read the responses from others who had been inspired by Grace's journey. The ripple effect was tangible, each person's transformation had the power to inspire someone else to take a similar leap. As Emma continued to receive messages of gratitude, stories of transformation, and reflections on the impact her work had on others, she felt a shift within herself. It wasn't just about building a brand anymore. It was about creating a community of people who believed in themselves, who were willing to take risks, and who were committed to living authentic lives. Emma realized that the most fulfilling part of her work was seeing the courage and strength in others. In the following weeks, Emma began planning a live event, a gathering of people who had participated in her workshops, read her book, or simply followed her journey. It would be a celebration of all that they had accomplished together, a chance for the community to come together and share their stories of transformation. The event would be a culmination of everything Emma had worked for, but it would also be a chance for her to see, firsthand, the profound impact her words had on the lives of others. The event was held in a large community center, with an atmosphere that was both intimate and vibrant. As the attendees began to arrive, Emma was overwhelmed by the diversity of faces in the crowd, people from all walks of life, from different backgrounds, ages, and professions, all united by the same desire to grow, to transform, and to live authentically. The energy in the room was electric, as Emma took the stage to speak. She was nervous. This was the first time she would speak to such a large group of people in person, and she wanted to make sure her words resonated with them. But as she looked out at the crowd, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. She wasn't here to perform or impress anyone. She was here to share what she had learned and to empower others to continue their own journeys. I want to thank each and every one of you for being here today, Emma began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. This isn't just my journey, it's all of ours. We've all faced fears, we've all faced obstacles, and we've all taken steps forward, sometimes unsure, sometimes afraid. But we've made it here, together. The room was silent, everyone hanging on to her every word. I've learned that the most important thing in life is to believe in yourself, Emma continued. To trust that the path you're on, even if it's not always clear, will lead you to where you're meant to be. And sometimes, the greatest leap you can take is to simply take the next step, no matter how small it may seem. The audience erupted in applause, and Emma felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She knew that this moment was a culmination of everything she had worked for, but it was also a beginning, a new chapter in her journey, and in the journey of everyone in the room. As the event continued, people shared their stories, stories of courage, growth, and transformation. Emma listened intently, overwhelmed by the strength and resilience of the people around her. It was clear that the ripple effect of her work had created a powerful community, one that would continue to grow and inspire for years to come. After the event, as Emma sat alone in her hotel room, she reflected on the experience. She had built something much greater than she had ever imagined, a community of people who were committed to their personal growth, who believed in themselves, and who supported each other along the way. Emma's work was far from finished, but she felt an overwhelming sense of peace. She had found her purpose, not just in inspiring others to take risks, but in creating a space where people could share their journeys and find the courage to take the next step. The ripple effect had only just begun. The months after the live event had been some of the busiest of Emma's life. The platform had gained more followers, the workshops had become a regular feature, and the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. But Emma found herself at a crossroads once again, feeling the pull to reevaluate her path. Her purpose had never felt clearer, yet she couldn't ignore the quiet whisper in the back of her mind, is this enough? Her new project was a success, but Emma began to wonder if there was something more she could do. It wasn't about fame or recognition, but about pushing herself further, expanding her impact in ways that felt true to her values. She wasn't seeking more material success, she was seeking deeper fulfillment, something that could sustain her for the long haul. The idea of returning to the mountains she had visited months ago began to surface in her thoughts. It was there, in that stillness and isolation, that Emma had been able to connect with herself on a deeper level. There, she had learned to embrace the journey, to slow down and listen to her inner voice. Maybe it was time to go back, not as an escape, but as a way to reconnect with her true self and recalibrate her direction. One afternoon, after a long week of workshops and meetings, Emma packed a bag and drove to the mountains. The familiar winding roads and towering trees welcomed her as she approached the retreat center she had stayed at before. The air was crisp, and the feeling of solitude was almost tangible. This time, Emma had come with a clear intention. She wasn't there to seek answers from the world around her, but to seek them within herself. She wanted to spend a few days reflecting on her purpose, on what mattered most, and on how she could continue to make an impact without losing herself in the process. As she settled into the same cozy cabin where she had stayed months ago, Emma sat by the window, gazing out at the expansive view of the mountains. It was easy to get lost in the beauty of it all, to feel the vastness of the world and her smallness within it. Yet, it was in that smallness that Emma realized something profound. She didn't need to have everything figured out. She didn't need to be constantly striving to make a difference. Sometimes, simply being present was enough. That evening, Emma went for a walk along the familiar trail that had brought her peace before. The cool breeze rustled the leaves above her as she walked, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the quiet. With each step, Emma felt the weight of her responsibilities begin to lift. She wasn't here to carry the world on her shoulders. She was here to reconnect with herself, to breathe, to slow down. As she reached the clearing at the top of the trail, Emma stopped to take in the view. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden hue over the landscape. It was a sight she had seen before, but this time it felt different, more meaningful. Emma closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the peace settle within her. In that moment, she realized that her journey wasn't about constantly doing more or reaching higher. It was about finding joy in the process, in the act of living authentically, and in sharing that authenticity with others. Her impact wasn't measured by how much she achieved, but by how much she inspired others to be true to themselves. The real work was in creating space for others to explore their own journeys, to embrace the unknown, and to trust that the answers would come when they were ready. When Emma returned from the retreat, she felt a renewed sense of clarity. She had no immediate answers or grand plans, but she knew that she was on the right path. The work she had been doing was meaningful, and the community she had built was thriving. But it wasn't about how much she could accomplish, it was about the quality of the connections she made along the way, both with others and with herself. A few weeks later, Emma announced the next phase of her work, a series of online retreats focused on deep, inner transformation. These retreats would be different from her usual workshops. They would be slower, more reflective, and centered around creating space for participants to explore their own personal growth at their own pace. The response was overwhelming. People were hungry for something deeper, something more authentic than the usual quick-fix workshops or seminars. Emma realized that this was the next step in her journey, not to do more, but to invite others to slow down, to be still, and to truly listen to their inner selves. As she prepared for the first online retreat, Emma felt a deep sense of gratitude for how far she had come. She had come full circle, from the woman who had felt lost and overwhelmed by the world's expectations, to someone who had learned to embrace the journey with all its twists and turns. And now, she was able to share that wisdom with others, helping them find their own paths. In that quiet moment of reflection, Emma realized that the impact she had always dreamed of was happening, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet, everyday moments when someone made the decision to change, to grow, and to live authentically. The ripple effect was still growing, one small wave at a time. As the online retreats began, Emma felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. The groups that joined her sessions were small, intimate, and deeply engaged. People weren't just attending for advice, they were coming to listen to themselves, to tap into a place within them that had been waiting for expression. Emma guided them through meditation, self-reflection exercises, and discussions about fears, hopes, and dreams. The more she led these retreats, the more Emma saw how much people longed for deeper connection with their inner selves. It wasn't about rushing to a goal, hitting a milestone, or ticking off boxes on a to-do list. It was about learning to trust themselves, to understand that they were enough just as they were, and that the journey of growth was a lifelong process. Her work had evolved in a way that she hadn't expected. She'd gone from trying to fix or help others to simply being a guide, someone who could hold space for others to discover their own answers. It felt like a full-circle moment, a deep, intuitive understanding that had come from years of trial and error, personal growth, and transformation. One evening, during the closing circle of an online retreat, Emma felt the weight of how much had changed. The participants shared their experiences, their breakthroughs, and their feelings of relief. For some, it was the first time in years that they had taken the time to slow down and listen to themselves. For others, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where they could let go of the pressure to be perfect and instead, just be. As she listened to their stories, Emma felt an overwhelming sense of pride. She had helped create a space for people to feel heard and understood. She had helped them see that they didn't have to rush to find answers or follow a predetermined path. They could take their time, make mistakes, and grow at their own pace. And in doing so, they were already on the right track. Emma's journey, which had started with a single step into the unknown, had now come full circle. She had evolved from a woman who was searching for her purpose, to someone who had embraced that purpose and was now helping others do the same. The ripple effect of her work was not just about inspiring others, it was about creating a community of people who supported each other, who were committed to their growth, and who believed that they, too, had the power to shape their own lives. That evening, as the retreat came to a close, Emma paused for a moment. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for everything that had led her to this point, every setback, every success, every person who had crossed her path. She realized that this was not the end of her journey, but rather a new beginning. The work was ongoing, evolving, and expanding, just as she was. She had finally come to understand that the most meaningful thing she could do was not to change the world, but to help others believe in themselves so that they could change their own worlds. She wasn't here to fix anything, she was here to guide, to create space, and to remind people of the power they already held within. As she turned off her computer after the retreat, Emma sat quietly for a moment, breathing in the peace that had settled in her heart. She didn't know what the future held, but she was no longer afraid of it. She had learned to trust the journey, to embrace the unknown, and to know that every step she took was exactly where she needed to be. And with that realization, Emma made a silent promise to herself: she would continue to follow her heart, to share her truth, and to help others do the same. The journey was far from over. In fact, it had just begun. What has been the most transformative step you've taken in your journey? Was it a small moment or a big leap? Share your story with us in the comments below and inspire others to take their own next step.